In my quest to put together a Death Guard army, I am at the vehicle stage. I need to add some heavy hitters to my list. And that's kind of a problem because I don't really like the Death Guard tank, the Plagueburst Crawler. It's kind of a nifty little vehicle, 2-up save, a lot of guns, but it just doesn't do much for me. The problem for me comes down to its playstyle. The Plagueburst Crawler is all about indirect fire, and to me, indirect fire is really lame and boring. Just sitting it somewhere safe and then shooting whatever it wants on the board without any penalties to not having to interact with the game. I don't like playing against indirect fire. I don't like playing with indirect fire. I want something a little bit more movement focused, a little bit more aggressive. And so I picked up some War Dog Brigands. These guys are much more my speed. Fast moving, hard hitting, long legged tanks. And it doesn't hurt that this really expensive box was only $15 more expensive than one Plagueburst Crawler, but this box comes with 2 fellas. The only problem is those fellas aren't particularly Death Guardsy. That's something I can fix. The War Dogs are super cool, and up to 3 can be allied into any Chaos army. I've never built this kit before. It comes in 3 flavors: Ultra Punchy, a little punchy, and guns. I'm going with the guns, the Brigands. I built a bunch of the big stompy knights, and the little War Dog is actually a really faithful scaled down version. Almost all the parts are the same and go together the same way, just a little bit smaller. The only thing that was a little annoying is the legs are all one solid piece of plastic. It is set up so you can switch out which leg is stepping forward and back, but other than that, there's not much posability. On the feet, I don't love the triangular claw. It doesn't feel very doggy. I want all 3 toes pointing forward. To make this happen, I grabbed a playing card and cut a strip that was the same diameter as the foot socket. I cut it round to fit and then superglued it into place using baking soda on the bottom to build up some material. I clipped these into a step shape so I can get the toes on there. And I glued these into place and the card is just holding things together. I'll have to pin the foot later to give it some strength. I grabbed some plastic card tubing and cut this to connect the toes to the foot, cutting this tubing in half and then cutting them on an angle so that they would fit in between, and then I dripped some ultra thin superglue over them to lock them down. Now that's a foot for a War Dog. It's a much more aggressive look. I really like how these dog feet turned out, but it was kind of tricky to do and I don't want to do it again. So for the second one, I just built it as the regular triangle talon. But that's fine because I noticed a really fun opportunity on the sprue. There's the doggo head, but then right next to it, there is a bird head. And so one of these guys I'm gonna build up as the hound and the other one is gonna be the hawk. And it'll be fun because I'm bringing 2 of them in game, so I'll get to compare and see which one ends up doing the more damage over the course of the game. Now to get these suckers on some bases, some 100mm bases. I feel like 100mm is pushing the limits of how big a round base should be. It'll still make for a smaller footprint than the Plagueburst Crawler though. I started out gluing down a layer of cork and then built up some platforms where the feet will stand. Once I had the shape started, I tore up the cork to make it look like nice natural rock, and I had to fill in just a little bit of cork under his heel so there was something for the foot to stand on. Now to get him standing, I put some 1mm brass pins up his legs and then stuck these through the cork and through the plastic base. Once they were sticking out the other side, I bent them over and covered them with super glue. I really don't want these guys to break. They are big models with little feet. Now that I got my dog standing, I want to make the cork look a little bit more natural, so I grabbed my wood putty filler. I smeared this all over the base. This stuff fills in the cracks and smooths over the layers of cork, and once I had one goopy layer down, I started to remove the putty, smearing away the excess with my fingers and a wet paper towel. I want the natural shapes of the cork to show through, I just want them nicely blended. I left those bases to dry for a bit and I kept on building the bodies of these suckers. War Dogs are piloted by one unlucky fella who sits in the body of the knight, constantly being whispered to by the chaos-tainted machine spirit that they are so much better and more deserving than those nobles who pilot the big knights, and it drives them mad with envy. For weapons, the Brigands are armed with the Demon's Breath Spear, an actually good multi-melta at strength 12. Now you're supposed to glue the melta around the arms so that it can pivot, but I'm thinking magnets. I'm pretty sure I want to take the Brigands, but I don't know if I'll always want these guys, so I'm gonna leave myself the option. I took some 4.5mm magnets and sunk these into the arms and guns, using a little bit of green stuff to squish the magnets into. This way I'll always have the option. On the arms, I cut off the pegs and put the same size magnets in these. 4.5 is a really strong magnet. I always like to use the strongest magnets I can fit. I don't like loosey-goosey connections. And now I'll always have the best knight available to me no matter what the meta brings. I sealed up the sarcophaguses and glued on the rest of the armor, and now for those heads. I have an idea of how to make these heads extra fun. They kind of nest into the neck pretty far, and I want these things sticking out. And the way I want to pull this off is with some tubes. Lots of tubes. I drilled a series of 1.5 and 2mm holes all over the back of their heads and started sticking in some wire. I have some pretty thick aluminum armature wire. I drilled a hole into the back of the knight's body and tried to get this to fit, and it was really hard. I could not get the wire to slip into the holes, and I ended up just smushing the aluminum. What I ended up doing was sticking the wire up into the original hole, the top of the neck bit, letting the other wires just touch somewhere in the back. The super glue seemed to hold fine, so I started filling in the rest of the holes with some 1.5mm copper wire. The copper is just as bendy as the aluminum, but doesn't get all dented up by the pliers, and I was able to stick these onto the jaw and then loop them behind the head. I also used some guitar strings, which added some lovely texture. I put as many of these as I could fit and it worked out great. On the second head, I did all the wires first and then glued the head on, which worked so much better. I glued it up into the neck with plenty of glue, and I finished it off with just a couple of pieces of guitar string from the jowls into the body, and now I got some funky fellas. Now in my Death Guard army, I want these war dogs to take the role that would usually be given to the plagueburst crawlers. Their stat block is almost exactly the same. These guys have a 3-up save where the crawler has a 2-up, but other than that, it's pretty close. And in terms of their damage potential, both units kill about 4.5 Space Marines a turn. These guys though, they have melta-weapons. Their Demon Breath spears have a good chance of doing like 7 wounds to a Rhino equivalent, and that can spike. That can spike pretty high. What the Plagueburst Crawler has going for it is that indirect fire. Being able to reach out and touch anything on the board with a pretty good gun is not bad, especially for Death Guard where our units are really slow. But these war dogs, they're not slow. Movement 12, and they like to move. I am really excited to play around with these weapons, and I have some ideas for some subtle and not so subtle changes I want to make to these weapons. These meltas are called Demon's Breath Spears, but right now they're not feeling very spear-y. I cut off the ends with my hobby saw and extended these with some plastic card. I drilled some holes into the 2 halves of the melta and cut these tubes to be 4 equal pieces and glued them in with plenty of plastic glue. Now it looks like a weapon that can really reach out and spear something. For the Avenger chain cannon, the front barrel that the kit comes with looks too nice. I want to make it look much more ramshackle. I found this small aluminum pipe that I can use for the ends of the barrels. To make this easier to cut, I drilled a hole the same diameter as the tube through one of my little cubes of wood paint handles and stuck it through. Now I can get nice flush cuts. I sawed off 7 little pieces for each gun. I took a little round thing the diameter I wanted and traced around it so I can cut a round bit to cap off the ends of the barrels. I nipped it round, then sanded it smooth and glued it to the end of the gun. Now I can get the barrels ready. I purposely cut them random. I glued 3 little pieces together so they were flush on one side and sticking out on the other, and then glued 2 more on the top and bottom. Now that I have a little bouquet of tubes, I sanded one side flush and glued this to the front of the yellow plastic. Now I have nice, nasty looking Gatling guns. The only gun left is the Carapace weapon, the Diabolus Heavy Stubber. The Carapace also has weapon options, so I threw a magnet up here too, just in case one day I want to swap it out. I glued on the rest of the armor. I left some sections of leg unarmored, like this guy has not been properly maintained in a while, and the kit comes with all sorts of little spikes and horns that I glued on top of the armor. To get these horns to look like they're stabbing out from the inside of the armor, I grabbed some Tamiya epoxy putty and made little donuts to go around each spike. I flattened these out with my round sculpting tool, and to finish them off, I grabbed my hobby knife to cut in some cracks. This took a bit, but it'll help this sucker look Death Guardsy. I finished gluing the horny armor and my brigands are done, just in time to finish off the base. I grabbed some texture paste and my little craft beads. I put down a layer of sand, and while that was still wet, I sprinkled on some little balls to be Nurgling's Blessing erupting out of the ground. These guys are allies, so they won't spread the contagion, but they can take advantage of it. I put some more texture paste on top of the balls and then used a clean brush to wipe my balls clean. I used a different color of sand so I could see the new paste I put down. It is time to get some paint on these war puppies, literal war puppies, because of the War Dog Brigands, and I got out my Death Guard colors. These are the only paints that I use on my Death Guard, and they are from a now defunct line of paint, so I can't get more. These paints are, I think, probably 75% full still, but when they run out, I think that's gonna be it. I could always mix and color match and make it work, but I don't think I'm gonna. I wanna see how big this army can get using only these colors. And for right now, I've still got plenty of paint. Now I can throw some paint on. I love priming over some Kitbash work. I get to see the models transform from modified toys into the war machines that were in my head. I attacked them from above with some white paint for a zenithal, and now for my colors. To start out, I want to lay down my color so that everything gets a little something. This way, if I miss a spot later with my brush, there will be some color there. I threw down my colors randomly. My Death Guard color scheme isn't a scheme as much as a process. It doesn't matter what colors go where, just how they get painted. I loaded up my palette with all the colors I have available to me, and now it's time to start. His foot is gonna be green. I started layering down my green color and then mixing more and more white paint to brighten it. As I laid on this colors, after each mix I put down a smaller and smaller streak of paint. Once the green was looking decent, I glazed some yellow over top to shift the colors a little and warm them up. His last toe transitions to a brownish color, so I used yellow paint to highlight this pinky. I used some yellow mixed with a little bit of white to do some final highlights, and I mixed some black into the brown and watered this down to make a wash and dribbled this between his feet. This is exactly what I do everywhere. I just throw down some colors and then layer up highlights until they're nearly white paint. These war dogs are fun because there's so many parts to each leg. I can transition from warm bright yellow to icy cold blues and greens all over the place. Where the two colors meet, I just blend the colors together and let the highlight tones overlap. The brown in this set is a really nice rusty color, which is perfect for glazing in all the recesses and over all the rivets. What's kinda nice with a model this big is whatever color I had on my brush, there was always at least 2 places that I could put it. It was really interesting to try really hard on every inch of these legs. I really learned every single detail, and it really made me appreciate how well designed these legs are. With the colors I have, what always ends up happening is the model turns into spots of bright yellow, rusty red, ice blue, or jade green, with quick transitions in between. When I mix the colors too much, they tend to dull, so I keep them saturated and punchy. My Death Guard paint formula has been a really interesting experiment. A limited number of colors, only brushwork, no tricks, and it is the perfect thing for Plague Marines. Every single inch of a Plague Marine is unique and interesting. They got mouths coming out of their arms, and they got a nurgling wrapped around their leg. And so it's really fun to paint them in that laborious style. But it's been really interesting to take that process and put it onto models that maybe aren't as interesting, like the legs of these Armiger Warglaves. Actually, these aren't Armiger Warglaves, they are War Dog Brigands. They're just the chaos version of an Armiger Warglaive. But I would never in a million years spend this much time on these legs. If I was painting any other scheme, maybe hit him with a little bit of a gray, maybe a wash to shade the recesses, maybe a dry brush to bring some of those highlights back, and I'd be done super quick. But laboriously hitting every single piston and rivet and nut and bolt, it's really interesting, and it makes for incredibly striking robot legs. Is it worth it? I don't know, but it's the look of my Death Guard, and it's a really unique look. I've never super perfectly seen what an Armiger's legs look like, but now I have. And I'm really excited to see what the rest of this sucker looks like. On the Carapace armor, I have a much bigger, flatter space to work with. I loaded up a big janky old brush and slobbered on some yellows and browns. With the colors roughly laid out, I started to highlight, mixing some white into my yellow and sketching this on. Then I came back with my browns and dribbled this into the recesses and along the edge, coming back with a damp brush to feather it out. On edges where the armor turns into trim, I drip some brown really thin down and it flows along these seams, and I put down more highlights on either side of my yellow. I base coated all the pipes with my green and I washed them with blue thin down. What's kinda interesting with these particular paints is that the green and blue colors are transparent shades, so they behave a little differently than the yellow and brown. I kept on highlighting, mixing more and more white paint into my colors and putting these layers over top of what's underneath, just refining every bit of the paint job. Right in the middle of each armor are chains holding the driver door shut, and for these I mixed my black and white together to get gray. I use this so that I can get a new color down on the Mini and have these details stand out proudly from the crazy surrounding colors. After glazing a brown, I highlighted each link with some light gray, and for the windows, I painted these black. On the War Dog, I pretty much followed the lines of the armor, making each piece its own color. For the War Bird, I instead made larger sections of color that flow right over the details, using more blues and browns. I don't know which one I prefer. But you know what I always prefer? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find merch like our EOB dice, wet pallets, waterslide decals, and basing toppers and bits. It's also the best way to support us with memberships. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This June, we made an absolute monstrosity. What better way to show off that a battle is serious business than a god machine already dead on the ground? These shattered remains create thematic line of sight blocking and ruined terrain perfect for grimdark games. With a titanic rigor mortis claw, silent cannon, and lifeless eyes, this beast won't be doing much other than looking pretty while those who are still kicking win the day. This ruined titan fits right at home with our previous crash spaceship terrain. Now onto the faces, and I've been saving a color for these, pink. I laid down a base coat and mixed it with yellows to get some highlights, and I layered and sketched these on. The faces being the only instance of pink on the Mini will make these stand out. And it's also just kinda gross that their faces are a little bit fleshy. I glazed my colors over their ears and tubes and finished off with a splash of brown, really thin down so it only shows up in the recesses. I did some final sketches with my bright saturated blue over his ear holes and picked out his eyes with the same color. Being limited on my palette, I have to use what I've got, so these eyes can either be blue, yellow, or brown. Now onto those guns. I started off throwing some thick coats of paint down and using a clean damp brush to wet blend these colors together. This gave me some good saturation and blended the colors together. Now that I have some colors down, I highlighted each section one by one, spending some quality time doing some sketchy highlights on each section. One nice saturated layer and then one highlight layer. And I glazed more colors into the recesses. On the chain cannon, I picked out each barrel, doing a scratchy line down the length, working in layers until I got almost pure white, and then glazed some greens over the blue to tint it, and then throwing some brown in the cracks. For the base, I made up a slurry of brown and threw this all over the ground. I kept this pretty watery so that it flowed into the cracks and flowed away from the raised areas. I made up another wash of black and put this in the valleys of the base to darken them up just a little bit more. Then for the pustules, I hit each one with a dollop of orange paint and then watered down this color and dripped it over each ball, letting it flow into the cracks and crevices of the sand. Once that was dry, I dotted each boil with some yellow paint and then hit the rim of the base with some black. 2 War Dog Brigands. I have played against these models quite a few times, and it'll be interesting to be on this side of the War Dog. They're not gonna get the same buffs and synergies as if I were to bring the plagueburst crawlers, but I'm just morally opposed to indirect fire. I am not gonna do that. And I like the idea of fast-moving brawler shooter guys. I just feel like I'm gonna have a lot more fun playing with these guys. Looking at this kit in my Death Guard color scheme, they're kinda cheerful looking. I took what I would do on a regular Plague Marine and I just blew it up to the size of these baby knights, and it's a really weird psychedelic look with the colors going all over the place. I would almost call it chaotic. 330 points added to my Death Guard collection. At this point, I have over 2,000 points of painted Death Guard, but it's the wrong stuff. I've actually painted a lot of really, really big units, and the only thing left in my army is the little stuff. Should probably do some Poxwalkers, Plague Marines, and some Terminators. I have a lot of Terminators. Now that I got these guys done, might be time to work on those Terminators. Thanks for watching.